Something is off in Dubai. Not in the way you expect. Not something loud or obvious. Everything still looks perfect. The skyline still shines. The airports are still busy. The hotels are still open. But look closer. The people who were supposed to be there aren't. Long-haul bookings from Western tourists have dropped. Not slightly, not temporarily. Over 30%. A number that doesn't just signal change, it signals a shift. And here's what makes it more unsettling. This isn't being openly discussed. There are no headlines calling it a crisis. No official statements framing it as a problem. Just a quiet adjustment happening beneath the surface. Fewer arrivals, shorter stays, lower occupancy in places that were once impossible to book. So the question becomes unavoidable. What changed? Why are the very travelers who helped build Dubai's global image quietly choosing not to come back? Because once you understand what's actually happening, this doesn't look like a temporary dip. It starts to look like something deeper, something structural, and something that may already be too far along to reverse easily. For years, Dubai positioned itself as the ultimate destination for global travelers, not just a place to visit, but a place to experience something extraordinary. Luxury wasn't optional. It was expected. From the moment you arrived, everything was designed to feel elevated. Hotels that operated like private worlds, shopping centers that felt like cities, attractions built to break records, not just meet expectations. And Western tourists played a central role in that ecosystem. They were high-value visitors. Long-haul travelers who stayed longer, spent more, and returned frequently. Airlines structured routes around them. Hotels designed experiences for them. Entire districts were built with their expectations in mind. And for a long time, the system worked. Occupancy remained high. Demand felt consistent. Growth felt predictable. Dubai wasn't just competing with other destinations. It was redefining what a destination could be. And because it delivered on that promise repeatedly, trust built over time. Travelers believed in the experience before they even arrived. But that belief depended on something fragile. That the value would always match the cost. And that the experience would always justify the journey. The first signs of change didn't look like decline. They looked like variation. Slightly lower booking windows. More last-minute deals. A shift in how people planned their trips. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that suggested a problem, but enough to be noticed by those closest to the system. Hotel managers began adjusting pricing strategies, airlines started modifying schedules, travel agencies reported changes in inquiry patterns. Western tourists were still coming, but not in the same way. They were comparing more, deciding more carefully, staying for shorter durations, and choosing different seasons. These are the kinds of changes that don't immediately trigger concern, but they signal something important. A shift in behavior, and behavior is often the first indicator that perception is changing. Because tourism doesn't decline suddenly, it adjusts, gradually, quietly, until the pattern becomes clear, and by the time it becomes measurable, the shift has already been underway for some time. Then the numbers began to reflect what the behavior had already suggested. Long-haul bookings from key Western markets dropped by over 30%. Not across all travel segments, but specifically in the category that mattered most for Dubai's positioning. High-value, long-distance visitors. The kind who justify large-scale luxury infrastructure. The kind who fill premium hotel rooms, dine in high-end restaurants, and spend across multiple sectors. A drop at that level doesn't just affect tourism, it affects the entire economic layer connected to it. Because these travelers don't just occupy space, they generate momentum. And when that momentum slows, the system has to adjust. Discounts increase, packages become more aggressive, marketing shifts, but those are responses, not solutions. Because the real question is not how to attract more visitors. It's why fewer are choosing to come in the first place. One of the clearest factors behind this shift is cost. Dubai has become significantly more expensive. Accommodation prices have risen. Dining costs have increased. Transportation, entertainment, even basic services have moved upward. For Western travelers, especially those planning long-haul trips, the total cost of visiting Dubai has reached a point where alternatives begin to look more appealing. Southeast Asia offers similar luxury experiences at a fraction of the cost. Southern Europe provides culture, history, and climate at a more balanced price point. Japan, with its recent currency shifts, has become more accessible than before. And when travelers start comparing value, decisions change. Because travel is not just about destination, It's about what that destination offers relative to its cost. And when that balance shifts, even slightly, it affects demand. Another factor is changing expectations. The modern traveler is different from the traveler of 10 years ago. There is a growing preference for authenticity, for experiences that feel local, not constructed, walkable cities, cultural depth, natural environments, places where the experience is not entirely controlled. Dubai, by design, offers a highly structured environment, clean, efficient, predictable. But for some travelers, that predictability feels limiting. It lacks the spontaneity that defines modern travel preferences. This doesn't mean Dubai has lost its appeal. It means its appeal is becoming more specific, more niche. And when a destination shifts from universal appeal to selective appeal, the overall volume of visitors adjusts. Climate adds another layer to this equation. Dubai's heat has always been part of its identity. But for long-haul travelers, especially those coming from temperate regions, extended exposure to extreme temperatures changes how the city is experienced. Outdoor activity becomes limited. Movement becomes restricted. And for travelers investing significant time and money, that limitation matters. Because travel is about experience. And when that experience is confined to indoor environments for large parts of the year, it affects satisfaction, it affects perception, and over time it influences decision-making. There is also a structural component that most visitors never see. When Dubai's tourism model is built around high-end infrastructure, luxury hotels, large-scale attractions, premium services. This creates a system that requires consistent high-value demand to function efficiently. When that demand drops, even slightly, the impact is amplified. Because operating costs remain high, maintenance doesn't decrease, energy consumption stays constant, and revenue gaps begin to appear. To compensate, pricing strategies adjust, discounts increase. But discounting at the high end creates its own problem. It changes brand perception, it signals weakness, and once that perception spreads, it becomes harder to reverse. Another shift is happening globally. Travel patterns are evolving. Post-pandemic behavior has introduced a new level of selectivity. Travelers are taking fewer trips, but expecting more from each one. They are prioritizing destinations that offer unique value, places that feel meaningful, not just impressive. And in that environment, Dubai faces increased competition. Not from one destination, but from many. Cities and countries that offer a combination of affordability, authenticity, and experience. And when options expand, loyalty decreases. Travelers explore, they diversify, and they don't always return to the same place. There's also a psychological element that is harder to quantify. Dubai built its image on perfection, on being ahead, on always delivering more, but perfection creates expectation, and expectation creates pressure, because the experience has to match the image every time. And when it doesn't, even slightly, the gap becomes noticeable. Not immediately, but over repeated experiences. And when enough travelers begin to feel that gap, it influences how they talk about the destination, how they recommend it, or don't. And in the age of shared experience, perception spreads quickly. The human impact of this shift is often overlooked. Workers in hospitality begin to feel reduced demand. Fewer guests, lower tips, less consistent work hours. Businesses adjust staffing. Some reduce operations. Others close quietly. Investors who entered the market expecting stable returns begin to see fluctuations. Revenue projections change, costs remain fixed, and the gap between expectation and reality becomes more difficult to manage. These changes don't happen all at once. They happen gradually, but they accumulate. And over time, they reshape the ecosystem. This is not just about Dubai. It reflects a broader pattern. Cities that built themselves around rapid growth and high-end tourism are now facing similar questions. How do you maintain momentum when global conditions change? How do you adapt when traveler preferences evolve? How do you sustain a model built on continuous expansion? Dubai is not unique in facing these challenges, but it is one of the most visible examples, because of its scale, because of its ambition, and because of how closely its identity is tied to growth. Because in the end, this is not just a tourism story, it's a transition story, a shift from one phase to another, from expansion to adjustment, from assumption to evaluation, and that shift is still unfolding. The 30% drop is not the conclusion, it's the signal. a sign that something has changed, and that change will continue to shape what comes next. Now, another layer that explains the slowdown in Western tourism is changing flight economics. Long-haul travel has become significantly more expensive. Airlines are paying more for fuel. Operating costs have risen. Ticket prices have followed. For travelers flying from Europe or North America, the cost of a round-trip flight to Dubai is now noticeably higher than it was just a few years ago. And when flight prices increase, long-haul travel becomes one of the first categories people reconsider. Many travelers who previously saw Dubai as an easy choice now weigh the expense more carefully. Instead of automatically booking a long-distance trip, they look at closer destinations: Southern Europe, North Africa, Southeast Asia, shorter flights, lower costs, less time in transit. This shift doesn't mean people dislike Dubai. It simply means the cost-to-value equation has changed, and when that equation changes, travel behavior adjusts. There's also a major shift in the competitive landscape of global tourism. 10 years ago, Dubai stood almost alone in offering ultra-modern luxury on a massive scale. But that's no longer the case. Today, multiple destinations have invested heavily in high-end tourism. Qatar has expanded aggressively. Saudi Arabia is building new entertainment and tourism zones. Southeast Asian countries have upgraded their luxury offerings while keeping costs relatively low. Even European destinations have leaned into luxury experiences with stronger cultural depth. As more options emerge, the exclusivity that once defined Dubai becomes harder to maintain. Travelers who once saw Dubai as the only option for a certain kind of experience now have choices, and choice dilutes demand. It spreads travelers across multiple destinations instead of concentrating them in one. A factor rarely discussed openly is the changing perception of lifestyle sustainability. Dubai's appeal has long been tied to ambition, luxury, and rapid growth. But there is a growing global conversation about balance, about mental health, about slower living, about environments that feel grounded rather than accelerated. For some travelers, especially younger generations, the idea of a city defined by constant motion, luxury consumption, and rapid development no longer feels aspirational in the same way it once did. This doesn't mean Dubai is losing relevance. It means the definition of what people want from a destination is evolving. And when expectations evolve, destinations must evolve with them or risk gradual disengagement. Another hidden factor is the nature of repeat tourism. Many cities rely not just on first-time visitors, but on people returning multiple times. Repeat tourism creates stability. It smooths fluctuations. It builds long-term momentum. But Dubai faces a unique challenge here. For some travelers, Dubai feels like a destination you experience once. The major attractions are impressive, but once seen, the incentive to return may not be as strong. Cities with deep cultural layers, historical depth, or evolving neighborhoods often benefit from repeat visits. Dubai's model, centered around scale and novelty, can struggle to generate the same repeat pull. And when repeat visitation slows, overall tourism numbers feel the impact. There's also a structural issue tied to how Dubai's tourism sector was built. A large portion of investment went into luxury hospitality and large-scale attractions. This created an ecosystem optimized for high-spending visitors. But it also created vulnerability. Because when high-spending tourists decline, the impact is immediate. Mid-range or budget tourism segments, which provide resilience in other cities, are less developed in Dubai. This means the city has less flexibility to absorb shifts in traveler behavior. A drop in high-end tourism doesn't get balanced out by growth in other segments. Instead, it creates a gap that is harder to fill. Cultural perception also plays a role. Global conversations around culture, inclusivity, and openness influence how travelers choose destinations. Dubai has made efforts to position itself as globally welcoming, but perceptions vary. Some travelers feel comfortable and welcomed. Others feel less aligned with the cultural environment. These perceptions are complex and influenced by personal values, media narratives, and social conversations. They don't affect everyone equally, but they do influence a portion of potential visitors. And in an era where personal alignment with destinations matters more than ever, these perceptions carry weight. There is also a subtle but important generational shift happening. Older generations of travelers often prioritized luxury, status, and iconic landmarks. Younger travelers increasingly prioritize experiences, connection, and authenticity. They look for places where they can engage with local communities, explore diverse neighborhoods, and experience cultural depth. Dubai offers exceptional infrastructure and comfort, but its highly curated environment can feel less organic compared to other global cities. This doesn't make it less valuable, but it does mean its appeal aligns differently across age groups. And as younger travelers represent a growing share of the market, their preferences shape future demand. When you combine all these factors, rising costs, changing preferences, increased competition, environmental considerations, shifting values, and evolving traveler psychology, the picture becomes clearer. The decline in long-haul bookings is not driven by a single issue. It's the result of multiple forces converging at once. And that makes the situation more complex, because solving it isn't about fixing one problem. It requires adapting to an entirely new landscape of global travel behavior. And that brings us back to the original question. Not why bookings have dropped, but what this shift actually represents. Because it isn't just a statistic, it's a signal, a sign that the world of travel is changing, that the assumptions that defined the last decade may no longer apply, and that cities built on those assumptions must now navigate a different reality. So the question isn't whether tourists will return. Some will, many will. But the real question is different. Will Dubai remain the default choice it once was, or will it become just one option among many? So, what do you think? Is this a temporary shift, or the beginning of a deeper transformation? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more deep investigative stories like this, subscribe to channel. Because sometimes the most important changes don't happen loudly, they happen quietly, and by the time you notice them, they've already taken hold.